As I mentioned previously, PDO has an inbuilt exception class that makes it very easy for us to handle errors that may occur in our application. If you visit the PHP manual, it is stated explicitly that you are responsible for handling errors that may occur when you are making connections to the database or you are querying the database. Basically, there are 3 error handling modes in PDO, and we are going to consider each of them step by step. The first one is the error mode silent. This is the default behavior of PDO. When PDO is in this mode, you are required to manually check for errors and handle those errors by yourself. And this is not a very good thing for your application, because in this mode, PDO actually exposes a lot about your connection credentials and also other informations that pertain to your database, which may give malicious users some pretty good information that can enhance what they're doing. The next mode is the error mode warning. This basically just throws a PHP warning. And the last one, which is the preferred method, is the error mode exception. This basically is going to throw a PDO exception, which we can then catch in our try catch block. In order to specify an error mode for PDO, we can do this in the options array like we did for the attribute persist in the previous lecture, or we can use the set attribute method to specify a specific mode for PDO error handling. So when we are doing error handling in PDO, we need to put our statement in a try catch block. The try catch block basically says try to make a connection to the database, and in the process, if there are any errors, I want to handle them in the catch block. So we use the try keyword and the catch keyword here, and then specify which of the exception we are going to be catching, and in this case it's going to be a PDO exception, and then we are just storing this in a variable. So let's quickly look at the code and see how we can make use of all of these methods. Before we go ahead to specify any of the error mode for PDO, let's just try to create a scenario where there's an error message here. So I'm going to add a string here, and then we're going to refresh the page. And here you can see here we have an uncaught exception, PDO exception with message could not find the driver. So basically we can see here that PDO could not find the driver that we specified. Okay, let's look at another use case. Here we are going to specify a wrong username and a wrong password, and then do a refresh. And here you can see that PDO gives us lots of information about what is going on here. So basically a lot is being exposed about our database, and to prevent this, we can turn on the set PDO to exception mode while in development. So as I've mentioned before, we can actually include it to the list of the arrays that we have here at one time, or we can actually use the set attribute method of PDO to specify which exception mode that we want for our connection. Let's use the set attribute method. We reference our connection variable, then we use the dash and the greater than sign and go for the set attribute methods. In between the opening and the closing bracket, we're going to refer to the PDO class and then use the scope resolution to actually specify which of the attribute we want to set. This time we want to set the attribute error mode. So we say attr underscore error mode. And next we need to say which mode we want to put PDO into. So we're going to say PDO error mode. The default is silent like I mentioned before. We can set this to warning, or we can set it to error mode exception, which is the preferred method. So this is just the first step. What we now need to do is to wrap all of this within a try catch block. So I'm going to grab all of these. The exception we want to catch is PDO exception, and we're going to store the resulting value in a variable called ex. Within the try block, we try to establish a connection to the database. If the connection is successful, we are going to display this message, connection successful. If the connection fails, we are going to access the PDO exception class using the variable that was specified here and get the specific error message. So here we can simply say echo a database error occurred. And right now let's try to do a refresh. You can see that instead of displaying all this information about our database, we just have this simple message, a database error occurred. Now, in development environment, you may want to see what is the specific error message that occurred. In that case, you can actually access the information stored in the variable like I mentioned before. So you can say ex and then we get the specific message. So now if we do a refresh again, we're going to get more detailed information about what happened. So this is important when you are still developing, but when you're pushing to production, it should just be the simple string, a database error occurred. So one last cleanup to our database connection script. We're going to define our connection parameters in constant that we can therefore pass into the constructor. Right here we say define, then open and close bracket, end with a semicolon. So the first one we need is the DSN. And then the value, we can just copy this and paste here. Next, we want to define another constant. This should be username. Let's make them all uppercase. Username in this case is task. And then we need to define the password. And this is just testing. And for the options, we can just create an array. So if we needed to add more options, we just need to put a comma and specify the next option. All right, so we're going to now use this here, DSN, which is a constant that we've just created. And then for the username, we're going to use the constant too, which is username. And then for the password, we're also going to use the constant, which is password. And finally, for the options, we're going to use the array. So let's do a refresh on the browser and see if everything works the same. Now we are getting connection successful because our database connection string is correct. So in this lecture, we have seen one way to make a connection to database with PDO. In the next lecture, we are going to create a table that we'll be using in the next section.